world didn't end with fire. It ended with silence. Cities collapsed overnight, not from war, but from the dead rising to reclaim what we thought was ours. This is not fiction, not myth. This is the record of humanity's final days, when hunger walked on two legs and the living became the prey. The outbreak began like a whisper no one wanted to hear, dismissed at first as urban legend or some cruel story spun by desperate survivors. But the facts, those few scraps we can still piece together, paint a picture far more horrifying than fiction. Because the world did not end with fire from the skies or nuclear ash, but with silence. A silence broken only by the sound of shuffling feet, gnashing teeth, and the screams of neighbors turning on neighbors. The first case was reported in a small rural hospital, where a man arrived with a bite wound so deep the bone showed, his eyes already cloudy, his skin clammy and cold, yet his heart still beat. And though doctors tried, though they cut, stitched, and shocked, nothing they did could keep him from rising again. Not hours later, but within minutes, his body lurching off the table, jaws snapping at the nurse's throat, and the infection spread from that sterile room into the town, into the county, and then outward like fire across dry fields, until entire states were silenced in days, communications cut, not by technology failing, but by operators screaming before the static consumed them. And what was once dismissed as madness became undeniable. The dead had risen, and they were hungry. At first, there were those who believed it could be contained. Soldiers in armored trucks, news anchors telling the public to remain calm, scientists assuring a cure was within reach. But the cure never came, and the soldiers who marched into burning cities returned as part of the horde, their helmets cracked, their rifles clutched in rotting hands as they staggered forward. And the news anchors screamed live on air before their cameras fell to the floor, capturing only boots scrambling as the feed dissolved into red static. And still the people fled, highways jammed with cars that would never move again, doors nailed shut while families suffocated inside, prayers shouted to gods who no longer listened. And everywhere the question was asked in whispers, how do you kill what is already dead? Some tried fire, and for a moment it worked, bodies collapsing into ash. But for every one that burned, a dozen more crawled out from shadowed basements, from sewers, from mass graves that no longer held their dead. And the ground itself seemed to vomit rot until the earth groaned under its own corruption. Months bled together in a haze of gunfire and starvation, the survivors reduced to scavengers in a world that once belonged to them, but now belonged to the endless tide of decay. And still the dead did not rest, their hunger driving them through rain, through fire, through bullets, each one relentless, tireless, deaf to pain, blind to fear. And it became clear to those still alive that they were no longer fighting to win, but only to delay the inevitable. And even delay was costly, for food spoiled, water turned black, and the night brought not silence, but moans drifting across empty fields, a lullaby for the dying. Children starved in their mothers' arms, men shot each other over scraps, and yet the dead endured, as though they had become the true inheritors of the earth, as though mankind's time had always been borrowed, and now the debt had come due. The few records left behind, scraps of journals, torn photographs, broken cameras, show us faces drained of hope, eyes sunken and wild, words scrawled in blood on crumbling walls. We are not survivors. We are witnesses. By the time the fourth month bled into the fifth, humanity had become little more than rumors whispered among the ruins, scattered enclaves of desperate men and women clinging to basements, abandoned prisons, and underground tunnels.
And yet, in the heart of the wasteland, a signal rose, a faint radio broadcast repeating the same words: Safe Zone, Mile Marker 66, Weapons, Food, Sanctuary. And it was like a spark in the ashes, drawing the last survivors toward it. Broken families, deserters, and loners marching through snow and blood to reach the promise of salvation. But salvation was a lie, because mile marker 66 was not a fortress, but a slaughterhouse, a failed military stronghold overrun weeks earlier, its radio looping endlessly from a cracked speaker while the dead swarmed around it in tens of thousands, their bodies packed so tightly together it looked like a living wall of rot. And still the survivors came, thinking themselves clever, thinking they could fight their way in. And so began the last stand, a night where the air was filled with fire and screams, Molotovs arcing through the sky, rifles rattling until their barrels glowed, knives plunging into skulls until hands went numb. And for hours it seemed they might hold, that maybe, just maybe, the human will could match the hunger of the grave. But dawn rose on silence, broken only by the gnashing of teeth. The safe zone nothing but a pit of corpses. And the few who escaped did not call it the last stand out of pride, but because it was the last time they saw humanity try to fight as one before splintering into scattered ghosts, each soul carrying the weight of knowing they had watched the world's final fire burn out in the cold. In the months that followed, the earth itself seemed to surrender. Cities smothered under creeping vines and smoke, highways cracked and silent, except for the shuffle of countless feet dragging endlessly forward. Oceans clogged with drifting corpses that refused to sink. And the sky, once blue, turned gray with ash, blotting out the sun until days were little more than dim shadows and nights an endless abyss. And yet, somewhere in the darkness, a few survivors still whispered, huddled around dying fires in caves and ruins, telling stories not of hope, but of memory, because hope had no place in a world already claimed. They spoke of laughter they once knew, of the smell of rain before it carried rot, of children's voices that no longer echoed. And sometimes they swore they could hear those voices carried on the wind, as though the dead were mocking them with echoes of what was lost. And slowly the living began to fade from their own story, becoming fewer with each season, until finally there came a day when no fire burned, no voice whispered, no footstep disturbed the soil. Only the endless sound of teeth grinding bone. And in that silence, the world accepted its new rulers. Not men, not kings, not gods, but the dead. And the earth turned without witness, forever cloaked in the cold, hollow gaze of empty eyes. For the age of light was over, and the reign of hunger would never end.